So this is just a quick summary or just sharing my framework for how I memorized the steps for the OSCE. Um, so it's my framework is look, listen, touch. And basically I'm wanting to make a video showing how I organize all the steps of the OSCE into this framework, but I think if you don't have time to watch that, it's kind of long. It's fast to just like know the framework and then you can fit things into it yourself. So basically, after you wash your hands and take vitals, pretty much every single step in the OSCE fits into this mantra. So this is what I use to help me remember. So look, listen, touch. It goes in the order of I like do it physically on myself to remember. I'll like touch my eyes and touch my ears and then put my hands out beside my head. So I'll go look, listen, touch, right? Look, listen, touch. So it goes horizontally from starting from your eyes and then it just goes out. Look, listen, touch. Look, listen, touch. So that's a nice little memory thing too. It's like even my own body can help me to remember. And so that was the mantra I just said to myself over and over during the OSCE. So you're basically going from the top of the person's head, literally their scalp is where you start, down to, literally a head to toe exam. And you just look, listen, touch for each body part. So the idea is that each body part you do all of these steps. So their scalp. With look, it generally means visually inspect, which you have to do that for pretty much everything in the OSCE. Even if I don't think there's anything you don't have to visually inspect. It's so easy to do and it's kind of your first step. So it's every single body part you're going to visually inspect and verbalize that you visually inspected it. So that's why you start with look. A key point I want to make is that you don't lose points for doing extra things in your OSCE. You only lose points for missing things. So even if there was something where you don't need to visually inspect it, it's honestly easier to just visually inspect everything by default rather than try to remember when you have to do it. I mean, you pretty much always have to do it, but just in general, if you're not sure if you were supposed to do something, just do it. And the only downside is that it spends time, which if you just go fast enough, then you don't really need to worry about that. So that's a nice thing to have in mind that I wasn't totally aware of when I was first practicing for my OSCE. So you start with looking. After that is listen. Now the trick here, actually I said all that stuff, how everything fits. It does, but I forgot to say what makes that possible. What makes that possible is that listen, you actually, for most body parts, you're not going to listen to them because they don't make sound. So anytime you can't listen, you replace that with test. I don't know what this symbol should be for that. Maybe a little thing or something. You replace that with test. So even though I say look, listen, touch, the other thing I could say, which I'm not really sure which one sounds better or whatever, but I like the listen thing because it lets you touch your ear. But the other thing you could say is look, test, and touch. So listen / test here, or I could just have it on the bottom. So it can either be, LLT or LTT. Either way, it kind of has a little bit of that alliteration going on to help it just stick in the head and everything. But most of the time, you're going to replace listen with test. So this middle step is special, basically. But it's so easy to remember because it's the only step that's special. So the look step will always be just visually inspecting. The touch step will always be something to do with touch, usually like palpating, right? It usually means palpate. Sometimes you'll like touch something to pull it out of the way so you can see better, and you'll be required to do that for one of your points. So it'll just be different types of touch, usually palpation though. And then, touch is usually palpation or moving something out of the way. And then for listening, if you can't listen to it, which is kind of intuitive, like when you get to the scalp, well, scalp's not a good example because you don't do the test either for that. You don't have to do either for that. But let's say you get to their eye, right? Their eyes don't make sound, so you can't listen to the eye. So you automatically know you're going to replace the listen step with test. So you'll do the eye test where you have 4 eye function tests that you give them. 2 of them are motor, 2 of them are sensory, right? So 2 of them are oculomotor tests. 2 of them are, vision tests, vision, since that's the sensation for the eye. So that sort of thing. So you pretty much go head to toe, look, listen, test. When it comes to the heart, you're listening, in the cardiovascular, right? When you get here, you also listen to their lungs when you get here in the thorax. And that's pretty much it. So outside of those, everything else, you're going to replace listen with test. So if you have that look, listen, touch mantra, and you just know that the middle step, listen, is more often than not going to be replaced by test rather than listening, then you pretty much have a little compact little mantra that you can fit all the steps into, which I found really helpful because, you have the checklist and everything, and you learn the steps for the OSCE. But when I was learning it, it did not occur to me that there was a pattern like this until I went totally out of my way to look for one. So this made it a lot more manageable. Look, listen, touch. And in most cases, look, test, and touch. The reason I still say look, listen, touch, even though the listen is usually replaced by test, the reason I say look, listen, touch is because it lets you do this little thing, look, listen, touch. So it's like the mantra is implanted on your body, and it makes it even easier to remember. The order of it also is significant. For most of the steps, for most of them, it actually doesn't matter the order. For most of the body parts, that you're, examining. It doesn't matter the order that you look, listen, and touch in. But there are some where you actually have to do it in this order. And for all the ones where there's a required order, it does follow this order. So that's nice too. Like when you get to the cardiovascular and you're doing the vascular in their neck, right? So you're doing the, carotid artery and everything. You're required to listen with your stethoscope before you palpate the artery, because if there's something abnormal and you didn't listen and you didn't hear it and you palpated, that abnormality could be a clot, and you could dislodge the clot and cause it to break off and embolize and travel somewhere else and travel to their brain and cause a stroke or something. So, there are a few things like that where there's a reason for it and you're required to do it in this order. The good thing is that it's already in this order anyway, so you're already going to be doing it in that order, so it makes it convenient. The other thing is, after you kind of go head to toe and examine their head and all their eyes, nose, mouth, ears, and their neck and everything, lymph nodes, then you do the thorax, right? So you have head and neck first, you have thorax next, which is heart and lungs, then you have abdomen next. Then after abdomen, you're going to do the MSK part, where it's like all their joints. You basically have to look, listen, and touch every single joint in their body. It's literally every joint in their body, so there's not much memorization involved, because you just make sure to hit every joint, which is nice, including their spinal column, right? Those are all joints, intervertebral joints. After the MSK, you have neuro. So neuro is the only part that you kind of have to memorize a little more, and I memorized that based on the cranial nerves. So if you know your cranial nerves 1 through 12, that helps a lot, because just make sure to account for every one of those, and then account for balance stuff, cerebellar stuff, gait, etc. And then do your motor and your sensory too, and then motor plus sensory, which is reflexes. I'm kind of rambling right now anyway. That's you might not know what I'm talking about unless you've already gotten to that, but basically the main point is that you start out washing your hands and taking vitals, then you finish off with neuro exam. Everything in between that, including the normal exam and the MSK part of the exam, which is just focused on joints pretty much, all of those are look, listen, and touch. When it comes to the MSK part, it's more convenient to switch the order of these. So it's more convenient to look, touch, and then test. Obviously not listen. You can't listen to their joints. But, visually inspect the joint, then palpate the joint, and then have them test their joint function. So you'll have them do certain movements. you're pretty much doing that for every single joint in the body when you do the MSK part. So when you have that pattern, it makes it easy to memorize the whole thing, because it follows that pattern. So, and then when it comes to the normal head to toe exam, you're usually doing these three in this order, or these three in this order. So, yep, that's it. That's the framework. So, yeah, I think this just makes it a lot easier to remember and have some organization to what you're supposed to be doing with the OSCE. And then as you're looking at the steps, when you look at that check sheet, that checklist that they give you, you can fit those steps into this framework. Then it kind of helps you to realize, oh, okay, it looks like a million steps, but actually, if you fit it into this, it's mostly like the same sort of thing. You're just doing it over and over, or you're doing it in slightly different ways for the different organ systems.